Right, so welcome to the abnormalities of definition lesson. If we have a look at the specification, there are four that you've got to know. Okay, you've got to know statistical for infrequency, deviation from social norms, failure to function adequately, and deviation from ideal mental health. And all four of these definitions, really, they tell you whether someone is mentally ill or not. When we're talking about mental illness, we're looking at any sort of mental disorder, phobias, depression, or OCD. Right, let's just have a quick recap. Remember, AO1 is all about the knowledge. It's all about the theory behind something, a definition. Whereas AO3, that's all the evaluation, the strengths, the limitations of a particular definition or theory. Right, so the first definition we're going to have a look at is statistical infrequency. So statistical infrequency states that you are normal if you do the same as the majority. So if a majority of people in society do something, then that's considered normal. Whereas abnormal behaviour is what the minority do. If not a lot of people do something, or if something deviates from the norm, then that behaviour is considered to be abnormal. So basically, it's considered abnormal if something is statistically rare. So if it doesn't happen very often, then this definition states that you are considered abnormal. And this definition is different to all the others because it uses statistics. It uses maths, it uses graphs to state whether someone is normal in the majority or abnormal in the minority. Right, so in order to have a little look at an example of how we use statistical infrequency to state whether someone is abnormal or not, we're going to look at IQ. If you have a look at this graph here, it's a distribution curve. So if I took 100 people and got all of their IQs, this is the sort of graph that we'd see. And if you have a look, the average IQ down here at the bottom of the graph is 100. Okay, so the average IQ for the group of people we've tested is 100. And the majority of people range in between these two numbers here, 85 and 115. So you can see most of the population is in this area here. So this would be considered normal, having an IQ from 85 to 115, because the majority of people have that IQ. Whereas if you look here, only 2% of the population are below 70 or over 130. So this is a lot more rare. It's statistically infrequent. And because of that, having an IQ of under 70 or an IQ of over 130 would be considered abnormal because it's a rare behaviour. So we're going to have a look at this distribution curve again to show you how statistics can actually be used to state whether someone is normal or abnormal. So let's use an example of shoe size. So if I took all the boys in the sixth form and looked at shoe size, we'd get most people falling about size 8 to 10. So that would be this point of the graph, the highest point, the shoe sizes most people have. And that would be considered normal. However, there would be a few boys who have shoe size that's maybe size 4. And that'd be towards this end of the graph, towards the lower end, which would be considered abnormal. You'll also have a few boys who might have size 13 or 14 shoes. So only a small percentage, but at this end of the graph. And that would be considered abnormal because not many people have it. And the same can be applied to mental disorders. So not a lot of people have phobias. So they consider it to be normal. Quite a few people do have phobias, but it's only a small percentage. And because it's statistically infrequent, that's considered abnormal. Right, so we've had a look at the theory and how statistics are used to actually diagnose and define whether someone has a mental disorder. So now we're going to move on to the AO3, the weaknesses and the strengths of this limitation, the evaluation points. So one of the main strengths of this disorder is that it's very useful in clinical assessments. And to give you an example, there's something called the intellectual disability disorder. And this is all related to your IQ. And as we said before in the graph, only 2% of the population has an IQ below 70. And that percentage of people get diagnosed with this IDD. So because their IQ is so low, they have intellectual disability disorder. And it's because it falls within that very small percentage. It's not frequent, it's not normal. Okay? It's statistically rare to have an IQ below 70. And because of that, they are considered to be abnormal. And the important thing here is it shows that this definition has a real world application. It's used in clinical assessments of disorders. So that's a major strength of any definition. If you can use it in the real world to diagnose people with mental disorders, that is a major advantage of the definition. Right, so obviously it has strengths, but there's also limitations to this definition. And sometimes these unusual characteristics can be very positive. If we look at IQ, for example, if you've got an IQ of over 130, even though that's statistically rare, statistically uncommon, it is a pretty good thing. It's pretty positive. Whereas this definition can't make that distinction. Anything that's statistically rare is seen as abnormal. Whereas we'd see an IQ over 130 as a pretty positive thing. That it's a good thing to have an IQ that high. Whereas this definition doesn't make that clear. It says anything that is uncommon is abnormal. Whereas sometimes in our society, we see these things as exceptionally positive. A further limitation of this definition is that giving someone a label can actually have a very negative effect. If we think about someone who has a low IQ, so they've got an IQ of 58, so lower than 70, so it's considered abnormal. However, they get on with their day to day. They can get up, they can change themselves, feed themselves, they go to work, they can get on with their work. They're exceptionally happy. There's nothing wrong with them whatsoever. However, if we diagnose them with IDD and the fact they have this intellectual disability disorder, suddenly they have a label. They're considered abnormal. And that can have negative effects. People can start to lose self-esteem, lose their confidence, start to be treated differently by those around them, by their family members. People at work might start treating them differently, not being able to give them promotions possibly because they have an IQ lower than 70. So giving someone a label isn't always the best thing. If someone can function normally, then maybe it's best just to leave it alone. Maybe it isn't the best thing to give them a label of a mental disorder and being abnormal.